Welcome to Newswatch. This week we look at the BBC's reporting of the conflict in the Middle East. Is it one-sided? Many viewers say there's too little from Israel. I'll be putting their points to the BBC's head of foreign news coverage, John Williams. The Middle East crisis is now in its third week, and it's probably no surprise that the BBC has been inundated with calls and emails about how it has covered the conflict. Any story in this region raises a passionate response, but in the past week the comments have focused on the amount of airtime given to the suffering of Lebanese civilians compared to reports on what's happening in Israel. It's the tone as well, they say. Here's an example of the reporting from just one bulletin.
We went to the room where 13-year-old Zainab Haidar was recovering from an Israeli airstrike which killed her grandmother.
And they bombed two bombs. In the first one, my mother was, they hit my mother, and the second one, it hits the leg of my grandmother, and she died.
The dead woman's husband was distraught. There was another explosion there. We just heard, to give you an example of what people are living with. As I was speaking to this grandfather, there was an explosion in the hills, and that's the kind of terror which isn't going away, which they live with hour by hour every day.
We saw 3 plumes of smoke shoot up there. What we think that was Katyusha rockets being launched from right here next to the border, perhaps just a few hundred meters away, and that shows that even in this intense battle, Hezbollah clearly still has the capability to fire its rockets toward northern Israel.
Viewer Simon Ellman told us the BBC felt like it had become the Beirut Broadcasting Corporation. Francine Levin also got in touch, and she joins us from Leeds. Francine, what have you thought of the BBC's reporting of this issue so far?
Well, I'm a regular watcher of the news, actually, and over the last certainly few days, I've noticed that there's a certain bias, and this is, for me anyway, towards the terrorists, the Hezbollah movement. Their coverage seems to be getting bigger and bigger in comparison to the Israeli coverage. And in fact, this Wednesday, I decided to calculate the proportions dedicated to both sides. And my findings were these. 8 soldiers were killed in Israel that day, and that was announced. And then the announcer went straight on to discussing Kofi Annan. On the other side, Life in Tyre was interviews with suffering children and their parents. Obviously, my heart goes out to them. I don't like to think of anybody going through suffering. In total, there was a minute's coverage for Israel and about 10 minutes coverage for Lebanon, with pictures of suffering children, suffering families, including footage of children in hospital. My question is this: where is the public sympathy going to be? Is it going to be with suffering and dying children in Lebanon, or a 1-minute coverage of soldiers on the border with Lebanon?
John, before you deal with that point, we've done our own figures, and useful to perhaps if you know this. We've gone through all the main BBC One bulletins for the past week and logged coverage of what's happening to civilians on either side of the conflict. For instance, Wednesday's 10 o'clock news referred to there had 5 minutes and 16 seconds from Lebanon and just 12 seconds about Israel. In all 3 bulletins on Monday, there was exactly 10 minutes about Lebanon and 54 seconds on Israel. The total figure for the past week adds up to 50 minutes and 30 seconds of Lebanon coverage and 15 minutes and 52 seconds on Israel, and a lot of that has been in the last day or so. So perhaps you could deal with Francine and those numbers.
I don't think we can call a story like this simply on a stopwatch. But I do think we need to bear in mind some of the relative casualty numbers as to where the story is. And as of last night, 437 people had been killed in Lebanon, 383 of them civilians. And in Israel, there had been 52 deaths, 19 of them civilians.
This is absolutely true, but Hezbollah are trying to kill as many Israeli civilians as they can. They're maybe just not being as effective as Israel, but they're trying to kill as many people.
And that is why yesterday John Simpson went up in a helicopter with the Brigadier General of the Israeli Defense Force and rather effectively captured the sense that actually the towns along the border had been deserted because of the terror of people living under the threat of the Hezbollah rockets coming in. In the clip that you showed, James Reynolds also rather effectively captured the rockets coming in and landing in Israel. I'm afraid I don't accept that we haven't reported the terror and fear that populations in Haifa and other towns and villages along the border are living under.
Francine, did you see that particular item, and did that redress the balance a bit, showing how deserted Israeli cities were?
Yes, I did see it actually, and I thought it's a very, very